My name is Bruce Moskowitz, and I've got the pleasure today, Mr. Dan Retchin has invited me into Dan and Pearl's residence. Dan is a lifelong resident of Wilmington. Is it all right if I share with them your age, Dan?
Share what with me?
Your age.
Of course.
All right. Dan is a 97 years young and has many memories of the Wilmington Jewish community and
97 and a half years.
97 and a half. He'll be 98 in October.
Yes. That's a good beginning, because you're starting me off right at the beginning, and I'm going back in time. I actually started my education in the congregation when I was 7 years old, by every afternoon going to the synagogue, to Hebrew school, which is what we call cheder. And actually, I went to Hebrew school from the time I was 7 until the time I was bar mitzvahed, which was 6 years later. And the only reason, and then after that, I didn't really go into the cheder anymore. But I had, in those days, we had Hebrew school 5 days a week. And we had, I would say we had about 15 or 20 students, no girls, only boys. That's all that we had at the time. And we would have to go after school, and we would have to get there and participate in learning. And what we did most of the time, we would translate the Torah, the Chumash, from English to Hebrew or Hebrew to English, I don't remember which way. And then the rabbi would test us. We had a rabbi, my recollection is only of one rabbi, and that rabbi was Rabbi Minsky. And I want to tell you something. He was mean as hell. I'll tell you that man, he really was. He got me laughing at it. I can tell you a story.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you a story. I'm not proud of it.
All right.
This was some years later, actually, and I was older then. I would say I was maybe 8 or 9 or so, or 10. I don't know, but I came in. If you people don't, we would walk into the Hebrew school. And all the way in the basement, that's where the cheder was, in the basement of the synagogue, which was on Walnut Street. And then at the front of the building, the front of the room, were bookcases. And I said, well, you'd walk in and walk around to the front of the room and get your books. So I came into the cheder, and I walked around to get my books, and I turned around to face and I was facing the school, and I started to do like that. Well, I got my books. Then that day I had to go. I was learning a speech. I was learning to memorize a speech. The speech was to be in Yiddish, not in English. And so I had a place at a table away from the students. The students were facing, of course, the rabbi was teaching them. I was behind the rabbi, and then I went to the table, and I'm sitting there, and I'm studying. And then all of a sudden, I thought my world had come to an end. He came up on my left side, and he hit me. I mean, he hit me. I said, what's the matter? Make faces at me, will you? A light shone at that moment, because his son Herschel was in the class.
Okay. So it worked its way back.
I never told my father or my mother that he hit me. I don't think I did. If I did, it didn't make any difference.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Retchin. Did your family, was your family traditional? Were they religious?
Well, in those days, I think we were all traditional, pretty much. I mean, most of our parents were from Europe, and all they knew is keeping kosher. And also, I had a grandfather here, and because that was my mother's father, and he lived in Wilmington. and he was traditional, and actually it was a way of life, and everybody pretty well, I would say, kept kosher. Yes, we had a kosher delicatessen actually.
Really?
And it was the delicatessen was kosher, and in fact the family of Abelovitz ran the delicatessen. And
Well, let me ask you.
Yes.
Let's talk about the Jewish community. Was it a close-knit Jewish community?
I would say it was, yes, yes. It was all centered around the congregation. I mean, well, let me explain this to you. Like even going to Hebrew school for all of us kids. Now, for example, I also had to go to Sabbath services every Saturday. And again, I walked downtown. And a few of us did, quite a few of us. And I sat with my grandfather. Everything is in Yiddish. We had Passover, by the way, I want people to understand that when I said the 4 questions, I didn't say it in Hebrew, I didn't say it in English, I said it in Yiddish. Tate, ich will bei dir fragen, de 4 kasher. The erste kasher is, man ishtanu halaylo hazer. So this is how I was raised. My mother and father spoke Yiddish in the home quite often. Actually, my mother was born in America, but my grandfather actually had a tutor so that she could learn Yiddish.
That's
and be
unusual.
part of the community.
Let's go back to the community. Did the community, Jewish community, did they tend to live? Where did they live? Did they live close to each other? Or?
Well, a lot of them lived. I tell you, they're businesses. There were a lot of Jewish businesses, of course. And on 4th Street was full of Jewish-owned stores, the furniture stores, Briskin's grocery store, shoe repair shop, Rubens. I can't even go down the line. Axler's, DeLugan. I mean, all of these names. Levine and Front Street. There was some business on Front Street. Like right now, Kingoff's they were on Front Street. Castle Street had a lot of Jewish businesses. This was the kind of things that the Jewish community got into, and had retail stores or house-to-house selling or something of that sort.
Did the Jewish community, did they have much interaction with the non-Jewish community?
Not much.
No?
Not much. Of course, the temple congregation, they had been here much longer. They were already 1st and 2nd generation. And there was a schism, actually, in some respects between them and these, what they called greeners that came from Eastern Europe years later. Our generation, actually, our community actually started later in the 19th century and early 20th. There were some there that came here in the middle or late, like in the 60s or 50s and 18th century. Of course, that temple was built in 1875. So you can imagine they were here quite a bit longer than we were.
Your friends growing up, were they mostly Jewish, or was it a spectrum of the community?
Mostly Jewish, yeah, I would say so, yeah. I had friends otherwise in school, but as far as socially concerned, yes. Actually, my best friends, to a large degree, I can tell you who they were. They were William Schwartz, Joe Schwartz, Fred Scher, Leon Stein, and others, Babe Briskin, it's a name you don't remember. Mm-hmm. They're on Briskin's here. But yeah, I would say so, yeah.
How about any anti-Semitism? Did you feel like you were different, or was it not?
Yes, yes, there was some. But it didn't affect us that much. There was nothing vicious, but I can tell you, for example, Bill and Joe Schwartz and I would go downtown and buy our tickets to the Bijou on Friday because we didn't spend money on Shabbos. And so, but when we went down, anytime we would walk down together, down Chestnut Street to go downtown, there were some kids on some porches that would call out dirty Jews and stuff like that, and had a little few fights every once in a while, but nothing other than that.
Okay.
I would say we didn't have any problems in school. I really don't remember any problems in school of any kind. And I don't think there was anything that I can remember that was anti-Semitic.
Tell me, I don't know what your recollection was, the Covenant Club.
Well, I don't remember when it first started, but I would say actually, because Pearl and I, my wife and I, lived in Charlotte. Actually, when I came back from the war, I went to law school, and then Pearl and I got married in 1947, and actually she and I spent our first year together in Chapel Hill. And then when I finished law school, I went to Charlotte. So we were in Charlotte for 13 years. So there's a lapse there of my presence here in Wilmington from 1948 until 1961 when I came back.
When you came back, was the Covenant Club active?
Yes.
Vibrant?
Yes.
Was there events there once a month, weekly? How often would y'all attend things at the Covenant Club?
Quite often. I would say very often there. We had a cafe there almost. We had dinners there. Of course, if this was, I do want to tell you something about the old synagogue too. We did have a social hall all the time downtown. Actually, the synagogue, the community rented a place downtown in upstairs in different places over the years that I can recall from my youth, where we had social events. And in fact, my bar mitzvah, when I was bar mitzvah at 36, we had a complete reception downtown.
Really?
At one of the upstairs lofts that they rented from different times to have the affair.
Well, now that you bring up the synagogue, I know there was separate seating at the old congregation.
Yes.
As a child, I was curious, did the children, did they sit upstairs with the women, or they sat downstairs? Was it gender-based?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. The male children sat downstairs, the female children sat upstairs.
And in the Covenant Club, I actually have some vague memories as a child. I think they called it the smorgasbord or something. It was around Christmas or New Year's, where we all go over there and they had all this food out.
Well, that was a good thing about the Covenant Club, because I would say that it was a great help to actually bring the community more closely together than it had been in years past from both congregations. And they had they'd always have a New Year's party, and we had dinners there quite often.
So it was a kind of core part of your social life.
Yes.
Okay.
I would say the Covenant Club was a very large part of our social life during the time that it continued. And then eventually, it was determined that it wasn't really needed anymore. Because what had happened to the community, some of the people had been accepted again more socially among the general community than they had been before the war. Our community, and belonged to the Cape Fear Country Club, other organizations, maybe social organizations, and so the Covenant Club was disbanded. And I don't remember the exact year it was, but that was probably, I don't know when do you think the company?
I think it was the early 80s, actually.
Could be, whenever that was.
I do. I do have some recollection.
Yeah, it probably was that long after.
This is Bruce Moskowitz, and I wanted to take the opportunity, while I've already spoken with Mr. Dan Retchin, I wanted to include his wife, Mrs. Pearl Retchin, and they have been married going on 74 years. Pearl, thank you very much for allowing us here, and I'd love to see if the two of you can just talk about the Jewish life in Wilmington and anything that's on your mind.
Well, I moved here in 1961. We lived in Charlotte. Our children were born in Charlotte. And we moved back in 1961. And so my time memories start then. And I had 3 children all going to different schools, different times, different carpools. And I stayed in the car, and my oldest son was at the rabbi's every single day. And Rabbi Friedman was the rabbi, Rabbi Samuel Friedman, and he lived 2 doors away from the synagogue, right next to it. And for some reason, this oldest son seemed to be there constant. I was constantly going to the rabbi's house to pick him up. And I asked him one day, I was exhausted, and I said, Rabbi, why are we doing this 7 days a week? And not only Hebrew school, but Shabbos, the children would walk over to his house and have lunch. He'd give them a beautiful lunch. They'd sit and have a deep discussion about Judaism. He had contests for them with a comic book as a prize, and they would try to fight each other, to kill each other, to win. He'd take them bowling. It was a really close relationship. He was a great psychologist. And I asked him why Sheldon was coming to his house every day. He said, because he wants to do his own bar mitzvah from beginning to end, aliyahs, everything. And nobody's ever done that. And it's a big challenge. If he does it, he will never be afraid of any challenge for the rest of his life. And Rabbi Friedman was absolutely right. And I cherish his memory. I think he was what you want every rabbi to be for your children and your family. And I just wanted to mention that. That's
wonderful
dearest
that he's made that kind of impact on your kids.
Yeah.
And Dan, anything else that?
Well, I thought I was going to talk about the lifestyle. Of course, during the time we're talking about keeping kosher, for example.
Sure.
And this was just as a matter of just a matter of fact. I asked my father one time something about why we did all these things, and he said, well, we did them because this is how we did it in Europe, actually, in the old country. Just like speaking Yiddish. Yiddish was the language, I think all the men and women could speak Yiddish, that our parents. This was just accepted. And talking about the lifestyle, and like we were talking about where we lived on Chestnut Street, we had a big barrel in the garage full of brine and pickles. They made kosher pickles, and also we would take chickens to the synagogue on Walnut Street. If we had chickens that we wanted to, unfortunately, end their existence and eat, we took it to the rabbi at the congregation, right, on certain days when they set it up, and he would slaughter the chickens. And then I remember sitting on the back porch and plucking the feathers off of the chickens.
You had live chickens at home?
Yeah, we kept live chickens. Oh, yes.
Was that unusual, or was the norm?
I don't think it was unusual.
Okay.
Maybe some people
we did it in Canada.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, Pearl came from a town very similar to mine. Very similar.
I had no problem with chickens, but when we had a turkey or a duck, it would stay in the backyard for maybe a week. And it became a pet, and it had a name. And oh boy, Friday morning, the rabbi came around, and I would be hysterical.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was, we did the same thing. Rabbi came and killed the
chicken.
And of course, we had a tremendous group of Wilmington Jews that served in the Second World War. I have a complete picture and list of most of the Jews that served from this community in World War II.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you talking, and like I say, your memories are priceless. We appreciate you sharing them. I feel very fortunate because I've known you my entire life, but I actually have memories of your mother and your father.
Yes, you
I
do.
remember both of them.
Oh, yes.
And because they were, your father was a regular Saturday morning attendee at Shul, so I certainly remember them from there. But is there anything else you feel that?
I think that's good.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is Bruce Moskowitz, and I've got the pleasure of sitting here with Miss Shirley Raphael. Ms. Raphael has graciously allowed us to come visit her. She's a lifelong resident of Wilmington, and she said she would share some of her memories of B'nai Israel and the Wilmington Jewish community. So Shirley, thank you very much for allowing us to come today. Let me just ask you just some things, thinking out loud. I know your family, or your father specifically, was very involved in the synagogue. Do you have any really early memories of B'nai Israel and just the Wilmington Jewish community?
Well, I remember the old synagogue very well. The women, it was completely separate, the separate seating. The women had to go upstairs to a small balcony, and you got to that balcony by going up a very narrow flight of stairs. And people were very interested in hats. See who was wearing a hat. And then the men were all downstairs praying, and the women were sort of like in a different world, because most of us did not read Hebrew. Yes.
Okay. When you were growing up, did women attend Hebrew school or Sunday school or not?
Sunday school, yes, and some Hebrew school. I did not.
Okay, but you went to Sunday school.
I went to Sunday
Was
school.
it a small group of kids? I'm
I
guessing.
think it was a pretty good sized group of kids going to Sunday school.
Did your family like attend shul regularly?
Oh yeah, especially my father.
Mhm.
He was very, very much involved.
Okay. And when you were growing up, tell me about, was it a close-knit Jewish community?
I think it was, yeah.
Your friends or your family's friends, were they mostly friends with other Jewish community members, or were they friendly with...
Mainly, I think, with Jewish members. Of course, I went to school and was friendly with my classmates. But I think the adults were mainly friendly with Jewish people.
And back then, most of the Jewish, not all, but a lot of the Jewish community did they live down on, where did you live growing up?
On 13th Street. My mother and dad were first married, they lived on Brunswick Street. Then they built on 13th Street, which was sort of the suburbs then. And on our street, the Schwartz family had a house, and the Simon family had a house. We were all neighbors.
Okay, and as far as socialization, do you have any memories of your folks? Did they socialize on the weekends? Did they go out with other people, or mostly stayed at home?
I think they got together in different homes. Probably didn't go out a lot, probably in different homes.
The Jewish community in general, were they active in the community in a civic way?
That came later.
Did it?
My father was in the Exchange Club. I think he was probably the first Jewish member. Justin was in the Lions Club, and he was brought in the Lions Club by Charles Block, who was probably the first Jewish member of that. They were just beginning to be accepted and part of the community.
Okay. When you were growing up, did you see much or any anti-Semitism? Did you feel different?
I'll tell you something. It's very interesting about the street where your mom lives. It's not a coincidence that there's a whole bunch of Jewish people on that street. They still had restricted covenants then.
I had heard that.
It's true. It's true. If you know the DeLugan house, which is built sort of off, I think they wanted to build in that area, and they weren't sold a lot.
Okay.
And I think one or two of those lots that were originally sold through a second party. There was restricted covenants.
And that was even in the 50s.
In the 50s, yeah.
Tell me about do you recall much about the move from the Walnut Street Synagogue to when they decided to build the Chestnut Street?
Well, they had to build it because the building was old. It was sandwiched in between two other buildings. I think in my speech that night, I quoted the rabbi who said during the high holidays, the smell of bacon went walking through the sanctuary. And the community was growing, and it served its purpose, and its day was over.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any memories of, was there a big dedication? I assume the community was very proud of the building.
That's what that picture is. Mm-hmm. I think that's the stone, that's the laying of the foundation in that picture. And they had a big party for my father because he was so much involved in it.
Your father was the president of the synagogue for years and years.
13 years.
Okay, I thought so. And let me ask you, do you remember, was it I know when they moved from Walnut Street to the current building, that's when they did away with separate seating.
That's right.
What do you recall, was that a big deal or most of the
For some people it was. Some people had trouble with it. Most people thought it was time.
Okay. Tell me about the Covenant Club.
Covenant Club was a Jewish country club, and it was very active in its day. They used to have parties every weekend, and they had a permanent maitre d' there, and it was very nice. And then as the community opened up and people began to be more active, at Pine Valley Country Club and the Cape Fear Country Club decided they could have some Jewish members. And so it served its day and began to lose membership. And the land was sold. And I even got some, Justin and I were one of the last ones, so we got some money from the sale.
Yeah, very, very nice. And the Covenant Club, I actually have some vague memories of being at the Covenant Club. Was it, it wasn't just synagogue, it was synagogue and temple Jews, is that correct? Or was it not?
I think it was mainly synagogue.
Was it? Okay.
There's a whole lot of interplay between the two. That came later.
Okay. Okay. And so y'all spent a lot of weekend nights at the Covenant Club.
Right.
How about the, your father, was he a merchant? What kind of business did your family have?
Merchandise.
Okay.
Yeah, ready to wear.
Whereas, do you have any recollection, the Jewish community, as far as the way they made their living? Were they mostly in retail? Did they tend?
Yes, all retail. In fact, on the high holidays, downtown just about closed up. Nisbet was a neighbor of mine, and he liked the holiday because there was no other dress shops were open. They were either in ready-to-wear or furniture.
Mm-hmm. There used to be a lot of those furniture stores down on North 4th Street.
That's right. And then BD had a furniture store downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And Castle Street. Castle Street had furniture.
Oh, did it?
Yeah. Jaffe's had a furniture store there. Evanston had a furniture store there.
Was the Jewish community in any way considered affluent or just middle class, or?
I'd say middle class.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Ms. Raphael, I very much appreciate your time and your memory. And is there anything else specific that you have on your mind as far as your recollections of growing up as a lifelong Wilmingtonian?
Just see the city grow from a very small Baptist religious town into what it is today. I saw in Parade magazine, they were listing the best places to live, and Wilmington was #1.
That's very nice.
And that's not the little town I grew up in.
It's unusual.
I tell you one thing we had, though, here, it was very good. We had an excellent school system.
Did you?
It was considered one of the best in the state. And when I went to college, I was very well prepared, where I saw so many of my classmates who had come from smaller North Carolina towns were not. We had a very good school system.
Yeah.
Of course, it was a segregated system.
Mm-hmm.
You often hear people say, we only had one high school. We had 2 high schools. And the kids that went to Williston loved it. A lot of them moved to New York, and they used to always have have a reunion at least once a year in New York of their former classmates.
Very nice. All right, Ms. Raphael, thank you very much for allowing us into your home. Thoroughly enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you.
Okay.
Yeah, my name is Bruce Moskowitz, and I'm going to have a conversation today about kind of the Jewish history of Wilmington with a particular focus on B'nai Israel congregation. I'm sitting here with Franklin Block. Frank is a lifelong resident of Wilmington, born and raised here, and he's agreed graciously to share some of his memories of what's, Wilmington back from his youth. Frank, thank you very much for being here. Tell me, Frank, your earliest memories of B'nai Israel, do you have anything where you first remember, whether it's Sunday school or the high holidays or Hebrew school?
Well, I remember it all of my life because the truth of the matter is, from what I was told, when I was brought home from the hospital after my birth, I was taken to B'nai Israel congregation. So I would say that's my first experience in life has been with the congregation. It has been a part of my life ever since. I'm 84 years old now, and I have been a lifelong member of B'nai Israel.
When you think back to when you were a child, or was there a lot of time spent at the synagogue? Was your life focused at the synagogue? Were your friends primarily there?
Well, a portion of my life was focused on the synagogue, particularly up to the time of my bar mitzvah. And I mean, I was going to Hebrew school, I forgot now, maybe 3 or 4 days a week, and going to services on Saturday. And so it was a major part of my life. And Rabbi Friedman, who was the rabbi at the time of my bar mitzvah, was a major influence in my early life. And he taught me Hebrew, at least enough Hebrew to get through my bar mitzvah. And the people that were members of the congregation, I kind of literally knew well into my adult life, because they were the same people that were, when I was a boy, they were here, they were young, but then when I grew up, they were older than me, but at the same time, they were still here. And sadly, most of those people have already passed away. And in the congregation now, I think it's primarily newer members than people that I knew growing up.
Now, when you were going to Hebrew school and services back, that was at the old synagogue downtown, correct?
Right. Well, that's where I was going to Hebrew school.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on Walnut Street, and it was, I think the kind of building was built back in the turn of the century or something. It was not a new building when I was going there, and but it was I don't know, the center of Jewish activity for those of us who were what was called at the time modern Orthodox, which later became conservative, and it was the center of our Jewish lives.
The Jewish community, were they involved in a lot of non-Jewish things, or primarily with any, as far as government roles or in any leadership type of community civic things?
Well, I that changed from person to person. Some people were very involved in the community, and again, I point to my mother, who, for example, who was involved in everything you can think of, and did things that I'm extremely proud of. For example, during the Second World War, Wilmington before the war was a little sleepy little southern town with maybe 30,000 people. But when the war started, it became a major port of embarkation, and there was a lot of military bases located around Wilmington. And so it was important that there would be a good USO effort in town to help keep these men entertained. And my mother was very much involved. In fact, the city of Wilmington, as you probably know, named the building of the USO after her. It's now the Hannah Block Historic USO, and that was because she was so involved in going around to the bases and putting together groups of young girls. And
Very good. And so I think you said you were 84, right?
Yeah.
So over the years, as you've seen, not just Wilmington change, but the Wilmington Jewish community, you look back, it's come, I guess, so far. I assume that the Jewish community, were they more traditional back in the 30s and 40s?
Perhaps so. Actually, I don't think it's changed that much. Keep in mind that the B'nai Israel congregation that we were members of, what used to be a modern Orthodox congregation, and now it's a conservative. So I think that implies that there's maybe a little less observance involved. The services were much different, because I remember when I was a young boy, in line with what was then the very Orthodox point of view, women didn't get on the bema. I mean, zero. They weren't allowed to get on the bema. Well, today we have a woman rabbi, so that's a much different situation. And so it's times have changed, and the outlooks have changed. The people have changed considerably. Back when I was growing up, there were a lot of people here who were immigrants who had come from Europe, and my grandfather was one of them. And but of course, as time goes on, they die off, and the young people come along and who are raised here, and so the nature and culture of the community changed considerably.
Whatever. Did the Jewish community as a whole, did the synagogue Jews and the temple Jews, did they have much interaction back in those days?
Not really.
Okay.
There was a very different cultural difference. There was a substantial cultural difference back in those days. Today it's much less. But back then, the temple consisted, if I remember correctly, I think I'm right in saying this, that primarily of what were referred to as Deutschen, German Jews, and the B'nai Israel was primarily East European Jews, and they socially just simply didn't mix. Well, the people who were the original members of the covenant, of the temple, original members, I don't think they're as prevalent today as they were back in those days.
All right, Frank, I want you to know I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. Clearly, I've known Frank my whole life, and I know you and your family have been very involved in both the Jewish community and the civic community. And I appreciate your time and your insight, and we look forward to seeing you.